Howard. I'm a pie maker and I'm the author of this book, Ms. American Pie. And while we're all stuck at home in quarantine right now, and we're all looking for something to do, I thought I would offer you some free pie classes. So we're gonna go through my cookbook, one recipe at a time, and I'm gonna give you tips and pointers. I'm gonna bust the myths. I'm gonna do all the things that I would do in my regular pie classes. But I'm just here alone at home on this farm in Southeast Iowa, and it's just me with the video camera, so bear with me with the amateur quality, but it's gonna be fun, and it's something that you can do with you and your kids. And also, pie is something that's meant to be shared. Pie makes people feel good. It's comfort, it's kindness, it's love. And the world needs so much more of that right now. So if there was ever a time to make pie and share pie, it's now. So enjoy my free lessons and go make some pie. Before we begin, let's all wash our hands. So today we're going to start off with apple pie. And for that, I use Granny Smith apples. They tend to have the most tartness. You don't want to use Fuji apples, or Red Delicious, for example. They're too juicy or they have no taste. So you want to start off with 3 pounds of fruit. There's kind of a general rule of thumb, 3 pounds of fruit to 1 cup sugar. That's what my pie teacher told me. All right, so peeling an apple. I know this is just a basic skill. Some people actually are not comfortable doing it. So I have a bowl for my peeled apples and a bowl for my scraps that the goat, Chaps is his name. Chaps is gonna get the scraps. So let me start off this way. All right, so peeling an apple, you cup it in your hand and hold it tight and firm. So, and then the knife is going to go up here toward the stem, and then you're gonna peel toward you. Use this thumb as opposing pressure and use this hand to your left hand, or if you're right hand, you know what I mean, whichever, left hand, right hand. You're gonna use that hand to turn the apple. So the knife isn't actually moving, it's the apple that's moving around the knife. Don't worry about getting it all off in one peel. Don't worry about taking the stem off, because that'll be coming off later. That'll just stay with the core. All right. Oh, look, a bruise, right? So not to worry, we'll just cut that piece off. Chaps, my goat, won't mind. Chickens also like pie scraps, apple scraps. Okay, so just try not to get too much of the flesh. And you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so then after you've peeled the apple, we're going to just slice it directly into the dish. Wait, this was supposed to be for my goat scraps, right? So here, that's what we're gonna do, is put the apple slices. So you want them uniform in their size, well, in their thickness, I should say. And I don't usually measure, I don't have a measuring tape, I'm not very precise about that. So I just would say, I don't know, 1/4 inch maybe. So you're going to just peel, get those. So this is a tough waxy skin. There are other kinds of apples that the skin isn't quite this thick. And like sometimes I use Gala apples, those are good. And gosh, one time I found some Jonathan apples at the grocery store that were locally grown, and they were amazing. That was a great pie. And I stayed in Georgia once and found amazing apples in the Dahlonega area. So people ask me what's the best kind of fruit. I always say whatever's growing in your backyard is the best kind. So I'm showing you how it showed you how to peel it just straight off into the bowl. But you can also get a cutting board. Well, how am I going to do this here? That's what happens when you're trying to do a video all by yourself. You can also cut down onto a cutting board. So be careful when you do that. I think I'm better. Have a little bit more control when I peel it myself toward me. Okay, so we're gonna do about 3 pounds of apples, and people ask me how many apples is that, and I say, well, that's maybe 6 apples, maybe it's 10 apples. It depends on the size of the apples. So basically just kind of use the gauge 3 pounds as your guide, and also depends on the size of your pie dish. If you want to make a big, huge heaping pie, of course, you can use more apples. Okay, so let's get our apples prepared, and don't worry about them turning brown because cinnamon is brown. So you don't have to worry about the color of the fruit. So we're gonna get that out of the way, and then we'll go make our crust. And then when the dough is all rolled out and ready to be filled, the apples will be ready when we get to that step. I've got my apples ready to go for my pie. I find that peeling apples is meditative. It slows me down and it gives me time to think. So I kind of enjoy making apple pie. When people ask me what my favorite pie is to make, I always say apple because I do just enjoy peeling the apples. Now, you may not have had as much fun doing it, but I also like it because I know that I'm going to have a very, very happy goat later. So we're going to go make our pie dough now. Okay, so first we're going to get all of our tools and ingredients organized. I want to show you a couple things. One, this is an oven liner, and it's washable and reusable, and that will save the bottom of your oven when the pie is baking and all the filling is dripping all over the place. Here is a very well used silicone mat, and this is really helpful for rolling space because you can wash it really well. However, I usually roll straight on my kitchen counter, but I disinfect it first. But anyway, this in this day and age, with all of the virus germs, I would say use the silicone mat if you have one. If not, just wash your counter really well. So one of the things I say is an essential pie making tool is this, and it's called in some places they call it a bench scraper, or a dough scraper, dough cutter, pastry cutter. There's all different kinds of terms for it. And this is going to be one of the most helpful things to help you get your pie dough to come unstuck off of the rolling space. And then I have a nice rolling pin, and I prefer the kind that has the ball bearings because it's really nice and quick to roll that way. And what else? I have some cookie cutters. This is an Angel. I got that in Newtown, Connecticut, and of course a heart for love. The Angel is just a really nice thing to put on top of a pie. You can decorate the whole top crust when you're ready. And then I have a little whisk. This is not critical, but it's helpful when you're whisking an egg because we're going to do an egg wash on the top at the end. And then a scissors and my paring knife. I use this for peeling my apples, but I'm also going to use it for my crust for some trimming and some poking venting holes, and the scissors we will use for trimming the edge of the crust around the pie plate. Oh, and that's the other thing. A pie plate is a really good idea. That said, you know what? You can make a pie in basically any kind of dish. It doesn't have to be round. It doesn't even have to be that deep. There's just a lot of things. You could even do freeform pie by folding the crust in to hold the filling in place. So yeah, really easy. Okay, and then for ingredients, let's get started. Okay, we're starting with a big bowl and 2.5 cups of flour. And I use all-purpose flour. And I'm not very anal about measuring, so I'm not going to level off my flour because I don't care. It's not really about precision. Everybody's so afraid of baking because they think it has to be so precise. And with pie, it's very forgiving. And I always say, hey, the pioneers made pie on the wagon trail, right? So how precise does it really have to be? How fussy do we have to be about our ingredients? So this is not the time to worry about perfection. I think we're all learning that during this time of quarantine and the virus. So 2.5 cups, so that's roughly 2.5 cups. Oh, and then I like to have a little bowl of flour on the side. That's a must. You'll see why as we go along. So I'm just going to keep a little bowl of flour here filled and have that handy, and then I can get my big bin of flour out of the way. We're starting with 2.5 cups of flour, and then I add a little salt. I don't measure. Well, I could measure. I could just use my hand. So just, I don't know, a little bit of salt, more than a pinch, less than a teaspoon. And then we have to add the fat. And the fat is going to be, in my case, I use half butter, half Crisco. You want 1 cup of fat to approximately 3 cups of flour. So you could do all butter. You could do all shortening. You could do butter and lard. You could do all lard. I live in Iowa, and the ladies here, they like to do butter-flavored Crisco, which I do not recommend. So your butter should be chilled, and cut it up into some really good-sized chunks, because the one thing is that we are going to want to have super chunky butter in our pie dough, because that is how the dough will stay flaky. And the other thing I really want to emphasize in this case, oh, and by the way, fingers make a very good spatula. And you see that we're using our hands. It's all about having a tactile experience, about adding the invisible ingredient of love into your dough. So I also have a pitcher of ice water, all right? And this is a cool little thing because it's got that little spout and with the little perforations to hold the ice cubes back when I pour it into the dish. So here's where we get started. With our bare hands, we're going to dig in. Don't be afraid. And we're going to massage the Crisco and the butter into the flour. So I'm picking it up and I'm working really just with my fingertips. Remember, we're not making bread. We're not kneading this. And the one trick to this whole process is that it is fast and not fussy, and you want to get your hands in and get your hands out. Some people use food processors. I don't believe in that. I think you should be able to be in touch with your food. I think you should be able to feel exactly what's happening. And I think that you really lose out on the experience of really connecting with what you're doing. So you see, that didn't take very long at all. And here I have this very chunky pie dough. My butter had been sitting out for a little while, so it got a little soft. Sometimes it takes longer to work it in. But you really want to have it chunky, and you do not want to keep working this dough. So get your hands out of there. Get your stuff mixed in with the flour until it's a little bit mealy, but not too mealy. Here's a big chunk of butter I found. I'm going to break that up a little bit and let that fall back in. Okay, so very, very light on your fingers. Pretend they are salad tongs. Now we're going to add the water. Now, a lot of recipes will tell you just add 1 tablespoon at a time and that the water is going to make your dough tough. Well, that's not true. What makes your dough tough is overworking it. So just note that I am not putting my hands in the dough very much. I'm going to drizzle some more water, and then I'm using my hands like salad tongs very loosely. And as one woman told me once, yeah, it's like fluffing the dough. So think of fluffing it, okay? Get your hands in and get it out again. And no amount of touching it is going to make this dough hold together. What makes it hold together is the water. So don't worry about adding too much. You can always add a little extra flour if it gets too wet. And just keep adding. I mean, this is the part where I see people, they just want to try to hold it together with their hands. Let the water do the work. Let the water be the glue and not force. See, I can do it one-handed. And then you start to feel it get heavy. You start to feel that it's going to hold together on its own, even without trying. And that's what we're going for. So it needs a little bit more. I'm going to move this clumpy stuff over to the side and add a little bit more down on the dry bits on the bottom. You see, I'm not kneading it, I'm just tossing it, like my hands are a little hand mixer. Okay, now there's still some dry bits on the bottom. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm going to add still just a little bit more. So do not worry about the amount of water, just worry about your dough sticking together. See, now it's all working. It's without me even forcing it at all. So now, because it is sticky, I'm going to take this little bowl of flour that I have handy here, and I'm going to make what I call flour mittens. So then I'm going to divide my dough into two, and with my floured hands, it takes the stickiness right out of it. And I'm going to form that first into a ball, then into a disc. Now you see how I have my wrists together, and then I bend my fingers, and it's not then my fingers aren't coming all the way in, it's just on the edges because I want a nice smooth edge. And don't worry, that's going to be cracky and ugly on the bottom side, but on the top it's nice and smooth. And that's what we want, is a nice flat disc. You know, think of it like a hamburger patty, but this is what we want to start with. Okay, so you're going to do that with both balls. First, form it into a ball. If it's too sticky, remember, just put some flour on your hands. Then it takes the stickiness right out of it. And your dough should be really kind of squishy, like Play-Doh, but a little bit softer. It's very supple. It feels very nice and smooth. So you see, okay, that's disc number 2. So we have our 2 discs of dough. This is the time when people say, oh, you have to refrigerate your dough overnight or at least 30 minutes. And I say, life is short. We don't have time for that. And plus, we used chilled ingredients. We used ice water, we used cold butter. So the dough is still really nice and cold. You know, there's this thing about letting the gluten settle. I promise you, you don't need to worry about refrigerating your dough. So we're going to go ahead and get the counter space prepared for rolling. And you'll see that we want to start with a very clean counter. So that's the first. I'm going to go wash my hands. So it's really important to start with a clean rolling surface. That's what I call like an insurance policy. Most people go running and screaming to the store to buy pie crust because they can't get their dough to roll out right, or it always crumbles or gets sticky. So we've already made it past the first round, right? We didn't overwork the dough. What you'll see is there's nice chunks of butter showing in there, so we know that it's going to turn out nice and flaky. That was round 1. So the next step is rolling it out, and as you saw, I just sprinkled some flour on my rolling space here, and now I'm going to set my pie dough down in the middle of it and sprinkle a little bit more on the top. So with the dough sitting on a little bit of flour with a little bit of flour on top, we're going to start rolling. Make sure you have enough elbow room. Okay, so we're going to come down starting kind of in the middle and pressing it lightly. You can adjust the weight depending on your rolling pin, depending on your own body strength. And then I'm going to pick it up and I'm going to sprinkle and spread a little more flour underneath there. Flip it over, make sure it's nicely floured, because that's going to be, like I said, our insurance policy, that it doesn't stick. And I'm going to keep rolling. So flatten it out, push, pull, whatever it takes. Push, pull. Now it started round, but it does not stay round. So in order to keep that pie dough from going off with a mind of its own to create like a map of Africa or something, we're going to coax it into the circle. So I say that rolling dough is like horseback riding. You want to take charge of that horse. You want to hold the reins and let that guy know who's in charge.
And then you could even sort of ride your horse around the arena, as I like to say. Coax your dough into staying round. Now here's a good thing that just happened to show you. The butter's a little bit getting a little bit warm and sticky, so I'm going to need to just stop, take a little bit of an assessment of what's happening, clean off my rolling pin, and if it's really sticky, I can rub a little flour on my pin too. That's another tip. And then did you see that little crack? Oh, maybe it's off camera. Here, I'm going to show you something though. Like, let's say you have this big mess going on. How about like the Bay of San Francisco? Don't worry about that kind of thing. You roll toward it and away from it, and toward it and away from it, and pretty soon that thing's all smoothed out. So the other thing is, how thick do you want your dough? And I say, well, and how big. So I say, don't worry about how big. Worry first about the thinness. So my pie teacher told me that imagine that you can see the stripes of the tablecloth through the dough. So it's really that thin. And then make sure you get all the way off the edges here, because it's still a little thick on the edges, and you might need to just put a little more weight into it in order to stretch it out. Maybe it's really thick in the middle, so you need to like just give it a little push, but not so hard that you gouge into it. So just work every bit of dough that you've got until you think you have enough. Then bring your pie dish over, and you can sort of eyeball it and see, hey, is that wide enough for my dish? And you know what, even if it's not, you can always cut and paste your dough to make it fit, to make it work. So now we're going to take this little pastry scraper that I was telling you about, and this is such a helpful way to get your dough off of the rolling surface. And my dough is pretty sticky right now because it's just warm in my kitchen. And by the way, that reminds me, you might want to put your other disc of dough in the refrigerator while you're working on one, just as a safeguard. I'm not worried about chilling it so much, just keeping it cold. So I'm using flour as another insurance policy. I'm going to sprinkle a little on the edge before I take my scraper and gently nudge that flour under there, and then I'm going to kind of flick this up to lift the dough off, and then gently pull it back as I go. And it's really warm, like I said, so this is actually a good example. I like it when things are a little more challenging, because then you can see the troubleshooting tips. So I'm going to come at this from a couple different sides, and because my dough is pretty soft right now, I'm going to be extra careful. I may not need the flour. If I do, great. If I don't, so I'm just going to make sure that it's completely free from the surface. And then I like to give my space a little bit of a swipe so I don't get all that gunk on the bottom of my pie dish, because I'm bringing the dish over. And then I'm going to grab the dough at the fold. And I would normally have my dough sort of more in half, but like I said, it's kind of warm in here. So I'm going to lay it in and pull it across. All right, and again, I like it when I can show you these like little flaws, right? Because, oh God, there's a hole, my pie crust sucks. No, it doesn't. It's fine. You can just push it together, okay? No more hole. Anyway, it's the bottom. No one's going to see it. Now you're going to lift from the edges and let gravity sort of help, and with a little help of your fingertips, get that air space out of there. All right, now what about this? Ugly? Yeah, who cares? No one's ever going to see it because it's gone. We're going to use the scissors and trim all the way around and leave an overhang, because we're going to want to use this part of the crust to either make a nice crimped edge, or we'll use it, in this case with apple pie, we're going to have a double crust, so this will be worked in with the top crust to seal in the fruit. And with your scraps, just hang on to those, just put them to the side, because we'll use those for our decorations later that we're going to put on the top. So, and if we have enough leftover scraps, we could actually make perhaps another pie, at least a small one. So trim around the edges, make it kind of nice and smooth if you can. See, looks all right. Don't worry about it. It's not about perfection. See this? Who cares? No one's ever going to see any of this. It's going to all look different once it bakes. So that's crust number one. Now we're going to roll the top crust and have that ready to go, because once we get the apples, make sure your space is clean. That doesn't feel clean to me, so I'm going to get rid of that. Start with a clean space. That is always, 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 always a good rule of thumb. Probably in life too. I think pie baking is full of life lessons. Also, my rolling pin is very gunky, so I need to make sure that that's clean before I start over again. Now, to clean that off, I can use my knife to scrape, and it's pretty gunky. Or sometimes I just use my hands. I know you only saw part of that. Oh yeah, look, I made a big mess. So let's clean it off. Start with a clean rolling space. Okay. And also I like to clean off the edge of this thing. That gets gunky too. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Okay, more flour. Let's get that ready to rock. Flour on top. And then kind of do like an X. Just always change directions and always pay attention to what direction the dough is going. Maybe it's not staying round, but like I said, you can control that. First of all, by watching it, and secondly, by coaxing it. So get this out of the way. I need some space here. And I'm going to roll around the edges to make sure those are not so super thick, because that's one thing, a lot of people just don't go all the way off the edge, but then you end up with all this thickness that you don't need. Okay, so that is pretty much ready to go, and when the time comes I will use my scraper, but for right now I'm going to go get my apples to fill the bottom crust. Ready to put the apples into the pie. They turned a little bit brown, but I'm not worried about it. And nor should you be worried, because like I said, cinnamon is brown. All right, we're going to do this in 2 steps. When I first learned how to make pie, I mixed the sugar and the cinnamon and everything in the bowl with the apples, but I learned from my pie teacher to do it this way. So we're going to fill the dish half full, and what I say is a lot of apples, press them down, press the airspace out. You don't need to lay them down perfectly unless you feel like it, you're welcome to. But I fill it almost all the way up to the rim. I don't want to be able to see through to the bottom of the dish. All right, so that's step 1, and I might have a few more apples than I need for this particular dish. All right, and then I have this mantra that I do so that I can remember. This is so simple, and just simple ingredients, okay? So it is salt, cinnamon, sugar, and flour. All right, repeat after me. Salt, cinnamon, sugar, flour. And I'm going to show you how we do that without measuring, just the way your grandmother used to make pie. So salt, like you're putting it on your scrambled eggs. Cinnamon, just sprinkle it out, and if a little too much comes out on that layer, then just add less on the next layer. And then sugar. So it's generally, the rule is about 3 pounds of fruit to 1 cup sugar, and Granny Smith apples that we're using here are very tart, so they're going to need a little bit more sugar, but not more than 1 cup. I don't mean that. This is a half cup measure. I can do this without actually measuring. What I like to do is just mound the sugar up like that. So you see that it's just like mounds of snow, maybe a little bit more, okay? So it's going to be less than a cup of sugar that I end up using. All right, so I forgot where I was, right? So salt, that's why the mantra is helpful. Salt, cinnamon, sugar, and flour. So I'm going to take about, I don't know, probably about 1 tablespoon and sprinkle it on there so it gets a nice dusting, another snow term. Okay, so it should look about like that, and the flour is going to thicken your juice of your apples as it starts to bake. So we're going to put the second layer on now. Finish off the rest of those apples. Get that out of the way. Press them down, so get all the airspace down, kind of just get them so that they lay as flat as possible. And that's why you want your apple slices to be kind of uniform in their thickness, because it helps them lay better in the dish, but it also helps it when it comes to baking that they'll all bake evenly, more evenly. Okay. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that being firm and nobody's hanging out over the edge. And I'm going to repeat the mantra: salt, cinnamon to taste, sugar, dusting of snow, or a little bit mounds of snow, and then this is the dusting with the flour. So I just grabbed kind of a handful, you can see. All right, and now I forgot one thing, and that is butter for the top. So I'll be right back. Okay, butter. Love butter. Butter is what gives the pie such a good flavor. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to just slice about a pat of butter. Actually, I kind of enjoy doing it. My pie teacher would just put one big tablespoon of butter on the top, but lately I've been in the mood to do something a little different and just cut smaller pieces, and sort of what they would say the old-fashioned way of dotting your pie with butter. So that's ready now for the top. So, okay, we're going to use this great tool again, remember? And sprinkle a little flour on the edge to nudge that up, and it's been sitting here for a while. I don't normally have my kitchen this warm, but for whatever reason today. So I'm going to peel it back, nudge that in there slowly, one little step at a time. This took me a long time to learn how to be more patient and gentle with my dough. My friend Kathy said that I would manhandle my dough, and that was true, and that's when I had to learn how you shouldn't overwork the dough, and it's not bread, you're not kneading it. Okay, so I'm going to bring the dish over to the dough rather than the dough over to the dish. Picking it up at the fold again. See, it's half folded in half. I'm going to slide it halfway across my pie dish, and then fold it back, or unfold it, I should say. Okay, and now we've got the top crust and the bottom crust, and I'm going to work my hands at 12 o'clock, and I'm going to roll under, and I'm going to pick the bottom crust and the top crust. I'm going to roll it with my fingers, just gently, like it's a pencil between my fingers, and I'm going to make it kind of like a rope, and got some thickness in it, because we're going to want to dip our fingers in there later to make that nice ruffled edge. But right now I'm just setting it up. So instead of turning my hands and my body, like having to work like this, I'm going to just turn the pie dish so that my hands are always at 12 o'clock. And this is where those scissors come in handy again. I'm going to trim as I go, because I've got a little bit more than I need, and I want to keep it as consistent as I can all the way around, because we want it to bake evenly. Okay, you see how it's just getting to be a nice setup, and then here we have a little too much again, so let's just try to keep it consistent. And if you don't have enough, you can always take scraps and build it back up again. So if you trim too much, or if you don't have enough, if it's too thin on one side, don't worry about it. So see, again, my fingers rolling like a pencil. Keep going. Keep turning the dish. I would edit this part out, but I think it's good to learn to remember to turn the dish and not your body. I think that's something that's hard for people to get used to. So I'm not folding it, I'm not tucking it down in, I'm simply rolling it and leaving it right on the edge. I'm using that edge. There's a reason that edge is there. It's to hold up that pie crust. And what this is doing, the top and the bottom, is sealing it so that all your yummy, gooey pie filling doesn't come oozing out into your oven. But remember, we have that washable, reusable oven liner to help catch any of the drips, so you don't have to clean your oven except that now that you're in quarantine, you have all the time in the world to clean your oven. Okay, so I like to run my hands around, make sure that there's nothing underneath the lip of the dish. I even take my hands and sort of cup it to push that in. And now the crimping lesson. Okay, for crimping, here we go. See this little bowl of flour that we've had throughout this little lesson? I'm going to dip my fingers in that bowl, just my fingertips. Now, using the thumb and forefinger as like a clothespin, this is not a pincher, it's just a placeholder. And then this index finger, just the tip of the index finger, is going to push in between these two fingers. It's going to push the dough in. And it's just going to be kind of like a rocking motion. So let me show you. So you just place your two fingers, this little clothespin I call it, right on top of the ropey part of the dough. And this doesn't do anything. It's just a placeholder. Maybe you kind of push down, straight down, but not in or out. So just straight down, because you don't want to push your dough out over the edge or too far in. So that's just going to, those fingers are just going to go down on the rim, and then this index finger comes in and it leaves that nice little crimp. See that? And then we're going to do that again. And pick up your fingers and do that again. So this is the only thing moving, is this index finger, not the other one. There are lots of different ways you can crimp your pie crust. You can use a fork. You can do different kinds of, I don't know, little thumb things to, but this is the way I was taught, and I think it looks really pretty. And again, I want you to notice that I'm moving the dish and not my hands. I'm not like doing this. I just keep moving the dish as I go, so that it just makes it easier to maneuver around the pie. Da, 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 almost there. There. Okay, so everybody's hands are different sizes. Everyone's little ruffle is going to look a little different, and it doesn't matter. This is your pie. It should have your personality in it, and don't worry about it. And if it doesn't look that great now, maybe you have cracks on the top of your crust or holes in it. This is going to change after it goes into the oven. It's going to melt. It's going to soften, let's say. Okay, so I'm going to take these little dough scraps I have, and I'm going to not knead them. I'm just going to simply try to form a little miniature disc, and a little bit of flour below, a little bit on top, just like we did. Make sure the rolling pin is clean, same formula as before. And I'm going to roll out this little piece of dough and do a couple of things with it. I'm going to do a heart, and I'm going to do an angel, because I think we all need a lot of love right now. And this angel, I got this in Newtown, Connecticut when we went there to bake pies for the grieving community after the Sandy Hook shooting. And we did 26 angels for the 26 people that were killed. And we're going to do an angel to represent, or let's do several angels, because a lot of people are dying of this virus. So let's keep them in our thoughts. You know, that's the part about making pie, is to think of other people, you know, to give of ourselves. And that's what helps us all feel better, is when we give to others, to not be so selfish, but rather be a little bit more generous. Did I forget to do my heart? I did. So just, we're gonna just know that we put love into this pie. Okay, so guess what I found out when I was getting my pie ingredients together? I discovered that I don't have any pastry brushes on hand. So how am I going to put my egg wash on top of my pie? I'm going to be like a kindergartner, and I'm going to finger paint. So don't be grossed out. This is just like, you know, I always say also pie is about improvising. So I am literally just going to embarrass myself in this video and do this by hand. But basically what I'm doing is proving that pie is not about perfection, and that you can do this even if you don't have all the tools. Now what I want to make sure is that all this egg wash doesn't pool in my little crevices, because then I will have like scrambled eggs on top of my pie. So if I had a brush, I would also dab at the edges, which I suppose I could do. What a bummer, huh? Oh well, you know those little pastry brushes cost like 50 cents at Walmart. Okay, so because I have this egg wash on top of my pie, it's going to act as like a glue for our little angels. And I'm not going to put an egg wash on the angels because these will bake sort of lighter and duller than the bottom, what's below them on the crust. So they'll stand out a little bit more. So I'm just going to put these angels on to commemorate the people whose lives have been lost already from this disease. Okay? And that, my friends, is ready for the oven. Oh, no, it's not ready for the oven. God, I forget so many things. Where's my knife? Here it is. Vent holes. You need vent holes, okay? So just breathing room for the apples underneath. And this is just random. These are just random vent holes today. I'm not trying to do a pattern here. But what I will tell you is that these vent holes are going to be important when the pie is baking, not just to release the hot air and that's building up inside, but also for sticking a knife in it to see if the apples have cooked all the way through. And we're on our way to the oven at last. You preheat the oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason you start with a hot oven is so that the crust will set and brown. So it's almost like searing it, like you sear a steak or ahi tuna. And so otherwise, if you start off with too cool of an oven, your pie dough is just going to droop and kind of melt. So we start off at 425, and then after the crust starts to brown just a little bit, we'll turn it down to 375. So of course you want to know how many minutes is that, and I would have to say it depends on your oven. So I have 3 thermometers inside my oven, and not one of them has the same reading, and the oven never seems to bake at the same temperature, so who knows? But that's just one thing that you have to be aware of, that your oven temperatures vary. Don't ever rely on it. You just always have to keep an eye. So look, I have a little tiny bit of scrap of dough left, and I'm going to roll that out, and I'm going to make little crust cookies. No, you can't see me, but here, maybe you can. Anyway, it doesn't matter. By now, you know how to roll dough, and I'm just going to roll it out thin enough so that it'll be like a little cookie. And my boyfriend, Doug, likes these little things. So I just sprinkle a little sugar and kind of rub it on there. That was the leftover sugar I had in my measuring cup, and a little cinnamon. And then I'll just bake that in the oven along with the pie, and I call that a crust cookie, or what I kind of actually call it is a grandma cookie, because everybody tells me that's what their grandmother used to do with their leftover pie dough. So you get a little extra snack out of the deal. Oh yeah, I think I've earned this. It's hard to be patient when your pie is in the oven, but it's a good time to sit and relax after you've done your dishes, cleaned up your kitchen. And it's just a good time to reflect on what's going on in the world and how little control we have over it, and how we just need to take each day and enjoy it and make the most out of it, and be as giving and generous as possible, because what I've learned is the meaning of life really is just being of service to others. It's what my parents taught me, and it's just what makes sense. It's what helped me get over the grief of my husband when he died. It's been 11 years now. I made pie and gave it away, and it was in that act of giving of myself, even when I thought I had nothing left to give, that's when I started to feel better. Like I felt that there was hope, and that I had some purpose left. So I hope that this exercise of making pie will have that same effect for you, and especially when you share your pie with somebody else and you see how happy it makes them. That's the best reward of this whole exercise. I don't mind the dirty kitchen. I don't mind how much I have to pay for ingredients, although I have to say the apples were only $1 a pound, so that wasn't bad. And yeah, it's just, and I look forward to my pie coming out of the oven so that I can share it with Doug, because I've been away for 2 months and he so warmly welcomed me back home. He's taken care of the goat and the dogs and cats while I've been away, and I'm really grateful for him, and I can't think of a better way to express my gratitude and my appreciation than homemade apple pie, which we will eat warm after we eat the big ham hock that he's got in the crock pot. Oh, that's farm life for you. But I'm just gonna hang out in the kitchen right now because I don't want to stray too far from the oven. I don't trust my oven. I don't trust any oven. And I always say that, you know, you worked that hard to prepare your pie. You got this far, so don't walk away from the kitchen. Stick around. Keep checking the oven. I check it basically every 10 minutes just to see, because sometimes, like I said, you start at 425 to get it to start to brown, and you just want to keep an eye on that. And then we'll turn the temperature down to 375 after it starts to brown. So I will, with that, go check my pie in the oven. Okay, so I'm checking the pie, and I had to turn the temperature way down because 375 was just a little too high. Now I'm going to stick my knife in here in the different holes, and there's too much resistance. You can feel that the apples are still hard, which they are. So that means the oven gets closed again, and it's going to have to bake a little longer. I might turn the temperature back up. This oven's kind of wonky, but 75, that's what I said it was supposed to be. I didn't want the crust to get too brown. Okay, see what happened here? 245. I had the oven door open for just a few seconds, like less than 30 seconds, and the temperature dropped way down. So when you go to check on your pie, maybe it's better if you just look inside through the door to see the color. Maybe just take a quick peek. But don't leave the oven door open because you'll lose all your heat. It's going to take a while for that to get back up. Guess what, guys? The pie is done. And how do I know? Well, sometimes you'll get juice kind of oozing out of the top, but in this case, the knife just slides right in those little vent holes, so we know the apples have cooked all the way through. Oh my goodness, I can't wait to eat it. Or let me say, I can't wait to share it with Doug.